Well, hello again, and again, welcome back. I was walking around the marketplace earlier. If you haven't had the opportunity to do that, I want to urge you to do that again. Something that really just warmed my heart as I walked around to each booth and said, how's it going, and who are you interacting with? There were about 5 people that told me that the star of the show today is our students. And they were so excited to talk to you, and they were so excited about how engaged you were in talking with them. So let's give our students another round of applause. We're so happy you're here. All right, well, it is my privilege to thank AARP and introduce our North Dakota AARP Executive Director, Josh Askvig. AARP is an organization whose mission is to empower people to choose how they live as they age. Fun fact, the AARP magazine is the most widely circulated magazine in the nation. AARP serves Americans age 50 and older, which I admit I did not know until I very recently got my first invitation to join. It was a magazine with Luke Perry on the cover. The original 90210. The North Dakota AARP and Josh have a special place in my heart because my mom and dad are dedicated volunteers. And they enjoy working with Josh, who passionately represents North Dakota AARP members along with his team. And they're also watching live stream today, so I'm just gonna say, hi Mom and Dad, I wish you were here. AARP is a tremendous supporter of the Main Street Initiative, and we are grateful to collaborate with them. And I'm so thrilled to introduce Josh. So come on up to the stage, Josh. All right, Josh is the state director, as I said. Josh has a broad background in advocacy, election work. He has worked on Capitol Hill as a campaign consultant, a lobbyist, and an appointee. He also recently served 2 terms as a Bismarck City Commissioner, where he gained a broad background in community planning and design. He is an endurance junkie and an avid runner who time qualified and completed the 2014 Boston Marathon and finished Ironman Wisconsin in 2019. One more thing, Josh is known for having the coolest shoes in the room wherever he goes. All right, thank you so much. Help me in welcoming Josh. Thank you.
Appreciate it. First things first, hello Mike and Marilyn. Sorry you couldn't be here with us today, and glad you're able to watch online, and thanks for all you do for us. One other quick housekeeping item I was asked to do, if you're in the health track looking for your CMEs, a couple of quick announcements for you. If you need an evaluation, raise your hand and they'll get you an evaluation. If you need to see the disclaimer that Michelle quickly auctioned off earlier today, you can find that on the forms on the table. If you need to complete the pretest, make sure you complete the pretest and turn it in. And then after Jana's presentation, you can complete the post-test and leave it on the table. And then you can leave all completed evals at the registration table at the end of the day. So now that I got that out of the way, let me just say it's an honor to be here. And I hope, like Michelle, many of you, when you get that first AARP card, you embrace it, because I often get asked, why do you work for AARP and what's the value of being at AARP? And I hearken back to when I was hired at age 30 years old to come work for the organization by my predecessor. And she reminded me something that I keep with me every day. She's since passed on, but I keep with me every day in the work we do, which is you only get old if you're lucky. And not everyone gets to see age 50, age 51, age 60. And as you heard Gil and others say yesterday, we're continuing to live longer, yes, including right here in North Dakota. And so embrace it as you do. And so I'm super excited that we have somebody from our Public Policy Institute here today to talk a little bit about AARP's work in this space. And Jana Lynott is a senior strategic policy advisor for the Livable Communities in transportation with AARP's Public Policy Institute. She is not from Virginia. She lives there now, but she's originally from Ames, Iowa, so she's got a Midwest roots and was super excited, and this is her first trip out to North Dakota, so when she comes up, help me give her a welcome for that. She's got a broad background as a land use and transportation planner, but she also brings that practical experience to her research field. She has a master's in urban and environmental planning from the University of Virginia. She serves on a transportation research board on their Safe Mobility for Older Persons Committee, as well as their Cooperative Research Programs Development Committee. Please help me give a warm North Dakota welcome to Jana Lynott.
Thanks, Josh. Well, thank you, Josh, and thank you to all of the conference organizers. I have to say that I've actually, just in the past 24 hours, feel like I've learned a lot about your state. The conference organizers have done a phenomenal job of putting information about all of your towns out on the tables, on the bathroom stalls, in the marketplace, and so it's just really well-run conference, as I can see. Josh mentions that I am from the Midwest, and I'm thrilled to be back here. I have quite an affinity for places that have expansive skies and where, when you walk out of the gym with wet hair, just the distance between gym door and car door, your hair freezes. So I feel at home here. Now, I'm also thrilled that I have the opportunity to share some of the work that AARP has been doing in livable communities, and also some examples of communities that are really hitting the mark and becoming more livable with the efforts that they're putting forward. So AARP is perhaps better known for our work in healthcare, access, and financial security, but increasingly we're showing up to demand that our community environments really help us age in a healthy and very fulfilling way. And when I talk about as we age and AARP's work in age-friendly communities and livability, what we're really talking about is making communities better for all of us, regardless of age. So even all of you millennials out there in the audience, let me remind you that you are aging. It's just the rest of us have a head start. I need to grab my clicker. So AARP is working on what we call disrupt aging, where we want to challenge outdated notions of what it means to grow older, but also outdated notions about how our communities work for our populations. We want to spark new solutions so that people can really choose how they live and age across the lifespan. So just to give you a little bit of framework for my presentation today, I'm going to be covering kind of 4 big themes. First, that demographic change requires us to think differently about how we go about doing things, but it also offers an opportunity to engage in community conversations that are different because that demographic change is so profound. We all are experiencing revolutionary technology right now, and that technology offers tremendous opportunity to address some of the very difficult areas of livability, but it also kind of introduces the possibility that our communities may actually have greater inequality over time. And then I want to just emphasize that our civic infrastructure in communities, it's really the power of small communities. And we need to look for solutions that really work to leverage multiple areas of livability under the same umbrella. So now with respect to demographic change, Chris Zimmerman yesterday in his presentation, I think, set this up very well in laying out some of that demographic change. But the fact of the matter is we are experiencing tremendous, profound demographic change. And by 2030, the US will have twice as many people 65 and older as we have today. And just to put that into a little bit of perspective, every day, 10,000 boomers turn 65 in our country. And so a lot of people think that this is maybe a liability for our nation and for our communities. But in fact, AARP, in working with an economic consulting firm, has identified that the longevity economy is actually valued at about $20 billion here in North Dakota. That are both the direct impact as well as indirect impacts of people 50 and older being employed, the tax income coming off of that, as well as consumer spending that generates other jobs and other taxable benefits. So we need to think not about aging as decline, but really about aging as an opportunity. But we also need to understand how that demographic change changes up how we go about doing business. And certainly the demographic change here in North Dakota is present as well. It's a state that's not aging as rapidly as other states, but yet in 2018, 1 in every 4 individuals were age 65 and older, and 13 out of your 53 counties. So when you think about all the revenue that's being generated through the longevity economy, we need to really think about how are we making smart investments that benefit people of all ages. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, are our communities ready? 1 in every 4 people 50 and older tell AARP through multiple points of survey research that they want to age in their own homes and communities. And yet many don't feel like this is going to be a possibility simply because so much of our community environment is not really set up for aging gracefully. So take, for instance, our housing stock. We've been building housing since the beginning of our country, really for able-bodied 35-year-olds. But what happens when our knees get too cranky and we can no longer walk up those stairs? And we've been designing our transportation systems, at least since World War II, around the automobile. But in fact, 1/3 of our nation does not drive, including 1 in every 5 people over the age of 65. And if you're lucky enough to live to age 70, you can expect that there will be 10 years at the end of your life when you will be a non-driver. So we need to really think hard about how do we structure our communities in ways that better help us address some of these very real needs. And one of the ways AARP has worked to help communities engage and provide a framework for that engagement with the community is through our age-friendly States and Communities Network. Back in 2015, we became an affiliate of the World Health Organization's Age-Friendly Cities. And since we've set up this affiliate, we now have over 400 communities, 5 states, and 1 US territory enrolled in our network. And these communities range in size from the just the largest cities of New York City and Los Angeles to very small communities such as Hart's Location, New Hampshire, with a population of 43. Now the initiative is organized around 8 domains of age friendliness or livability. And these include both the built environment, which are things like our housing stock, our transportation systems, outdoor spaces, public gatherings, as well as the social environment and the service environment. So as we work with communities, again, we want to emphasize that this is about doing work for people of all ages, and that makes a lot of sense. Given that for most of us, what we want in our communities is about the same thing, especially when it comes to walkable, mixed-use type of community benefits, those types of benefits we get from more livable communities. So both millennials, boomers, even the generation Gen X in between, they tell us that they're looking for well-maintained streets and accessible sidewalks. They want to see good quality healthcare facilities, grocery stores that are in good proximity to neighborhoods, etc. But the aging demographic is not the only reason we're showing up in this space. We also can see a growing body of research that shows evidence for how livable communities are healthier communities. So take, for instance, people who live in walkable neighborhoods are 2 times as likely to get enough physical exercise as those who don't. The number of children who are physically active outside is 84% higher when schoolyards are kept open for public play. And people who live near trails are 50% more likely to meet physical activity guidelines. And these benefits of livable communities show up even among people of older ages. So this slide, I know you can't read it, but it's basically a summary of the evidence-based research of how livable communities improve the health of people 65 and older. So for instance, walkable communities where there are sidewalks, intersections, kind of free of cul-de-sacs and other barriers that make walking difficult in the community, older adults have lower obesity rates. They're better, they self-rate their health much higher, and they also have lower rates of self-reported disabilities. In communities where parks, libraries, community centers, well-kept public spaces are ample, older adults show slower cognitive decline, and where there's healthy air, they actually have higher cognitive function. So the stakes are huge. Our communities we're not in this business just to create beautiful communities, but it's also about improving public health and ultimately can help us live longer. AARP, also as a tool to help communities become more livable, has created this, what we call our AARP Livability Index. And it's a groundbreaking tool that measures livability across 60 indicators of livability for every single neighborhood in the United States. And I encourage you to go to our website, aarp.org/livability index, where you can pull down your score for your community and see how you're performing. It happens to be a great conversation starter with elected officials and others in the community to better understand what are we talking about when we say livability. But essentially, the index, it groups those 60 indicators into 7 categories of livability, which are very well aligned with those 8 domains of age friendliness. So for instance, we measure housing, neighborhood, transportation, environment, health, engagement, and opportunity. And on each of your tables, there's a card from AARP that gives a little bit more information about each of these categories. Now, I want to give a shout out to Bismarck, which has scored as one of our top 10 most livable small cities in our index in both 2015 and 2018. And it scores 63 on a scale of 0 to 100, where 50 is the midpoint. And one of the features of the index that I want to point out is that it's very sensitive to the level of geography that you enter. So for instance, if you enter an exact address, it's going to pull a livability score for your neighborhood. And if you enter a city name, it's going to pull a score for the average of all the neighborhoods within that city boundary. So that does make a difference in how you interpret the score. Now, Bismarck scores particularly high in areas of environment, engagement, and opportunity. And these areas tend to be strengths of a lot of smaller and more rural communities. And they're the types of strengths that you can really build off of in your local economic development work. Now I want to move to sharing some stories about how communities are working to become more livable across all of these dimensions of livability. And I want to start with my mother's hometown of West Union, Iowa. It's a story about how a town initially set out to solve a very straightforward problem. Namely, they had 100-year-old pipes under their street and they needed to upgrade that system. But the problem was the town had been losing population for decades, and it didn't have enough revenue to afford the $4+ million investment required to replace that water system underground. And in order to tap into external funding, like grants, state and federal grants, and other community type of grants, they needed a much bolder vision. And so what they decided to do was tackle what they called a Green Streets Initiative. Now, Before we get to there, I want to just share that growing up, I spent a lot of summer weeks in West Union, Iowa, and I thought it was an awesome place as a kid. But as a teenager and young adult, I found the town to be a little bit boring. And I was quite surprised when my mother visited us in the Washington, D.C. area from Iowa, and we took her to Old Town Alexandria in Virginia. And she's like, Jana, this is what West Union, Iowa was like downtown on a Saturday night when I was growing up. And I was kind of scratching my head because this is Old Town Alexandria on a Thursday night. There's lots of people on the street. You can find street musicians, people going in and out of shops that happen to stay open later, lots of restaurants, etc. And I was like, that's not the West Union, Iowa I know. Now this is West Union, about 2007, and you can see that it's a beautiful little town. It's got a wonderful courthouse and town square, beautiful historic buildings, the quintessential tower, and those quintessential blue skies that you find here in the Midwest. But I'm really hard-pressed to see the sole human being getting into his white pickup truck on Main Street that particular afternoon. So I was like, I don't know. Really, it was like King Street and Old Town Alexandria at one point in time. But this is downtown West Union, Iowa today, and after their Green Streets initiative. So what Green Streets is, it's really a combination of trying to implement what we call complete streets, building for all road users, but in a downtown area, giving particular emphasis on the needs of pedestrians and wanting to welcome them in. So you can see there's some curb bulb outs that shorten the crossing distance for pedestrians, tend to slow traffic down. But they've also combined it with some green infrastructure, bringing some of that stormwater management up to street level and using it, filtering it above ground, and also adding to the aesthetic appeal of that particular street. But West Union didn't stop there. They actually got funding from the Economic Development Office in the state, as well as the Department of Natural Resources, to build a district-wide geothermal system under their main street that is able to heat and cool 60 properties in the downtown area. And if that wasn't enough, they also got other grants to help property owners do weatherization, energy audits, install energy efficient lighting. And they got state housing grants to build some affordable housing above some of those shops. And then finally, they also worked to build an amphitheater on the corner of their courthouse square to further draw people back to the downtown area where they hold community concerts and other types of community events. So what started out as a very narrow goal of solving some of their infrastructure challenges really became a much, much bigger project that touched upon all of these 7 categories of livability. Now granted, the project in the end was more expensive, albeit it wasn't necessarily with the town's money itself. They used a lot of outside sources. It also required a lot more community engagement and time, but I think the end result is that it was very much well worth it. Another small town, this one in Vermont, Bethel, Vermont, with a population of just under 1,500, they took a different tack toward becoming more livable. So whereas the West Union, Iowa example is really about the community's leadership, it was the city staff as well as your Chamber of Commerce kind of working toward this broad vision and working at it for about a decade before they really saw the type of improvements that you saw up here on the slide. Whereas Bethel, Vermont, they were more of a grassroots effort to try to bring together the community around just a one-day pop-up placemaking project. So pop-ups are really about using temporary materials that can be borrowed, built, and bought in order to demonstrate to the community what the possible is if you're trying to do something like complete streets or in other types of placemaking. So in October of 2016, AARP Vermont and Team Better Block came together with about 50 community volunteers, many organizations in the city or the town, and they started to work together to envision what are some of the streetscape improvements that we want. How do we want to activate our downtown area? How can we generate some local economic development and demonstrate this to the rest of the community? Now, not all towns have the resources to do a large-scale project around complete streets, et cetera. So a lot of times it's important you've got to build that momentum. You've got to build that understanding and belief that something can happen differently in a small town like this. So the project's objectives were to recognize how placemaking and community design influence successful aging, health, economic vitality, and overall livability, create healthier, more vibrant communities, demonstrate both sustainable land use and transportation practices, enhance opportunities for complete streets, and change perceptions and attitudes toward community change. So with that, I want to show a short video about what transpired in Bethel back in 2016.
Tropical Storm Irene just knocked this town for a loop. And the way that people pulled together to help each other, what you had was this tremendous outpouring of community spirit, and in many ways it has never gone away.
A large part of our work here in Vermont is focused on building and creating livable, walkable communities. The Better Block experience will be a real opportunity for us to be able to test change and then ultimately see what we can adopt more long term.
Bethel has been trying to find ways to stimulate creative growth and to get people excited and involved. And Better Block seemed like a perfect match for that, an opportunity to gather the community together.
We were so pleased that AARP asked us to come to Vermont. We put a call out across the whole state. Bethel scored the highest as a community in need. We're only as good as our partners, and we chose the right place because this is a place that is wanting to get better, and we've got a downtown that's just wanting to thrive here. We have a couple buildings here that have been vacant for about 20 years. The citizens helped clean them out and start pop-up shops in them.
It's really an amazing transformation.
It is. It looks great. I can't wait to.
It's really fun.
It's just great to have something in town where you can bring the kids and you don't have to travel.
The Blue Lane is about accommodating all users of the road. So anybody who wants to bike, ride, push a wheelchair, push a stroller, ride a horse, ride a scooter can use this protected space.
I think it really has meant a lot. It's a small town. It needed enthusiasm. It needed a little bit of new life. And I think that we've been able to bring that back, if only for a weekend. Hopefully it'll have lasting effects.
It was successful beyond our wildest imagination. It really was. People just absolutely loved it. and we're very excited about it.
I love the way they've slowed down traffic. That's just amazing because people do blow through here way too fast, and so they can't even slow down to appreciate anything that was here.
One of the biggest concerns for AARP, and I know for folks in community in Bethel, is issues associated with pedestrian safety, so that we can have kids walking around and bicyclists and pedestrians. So when you start slowing everything down, you create a much safer environment, and then you bring people, subsequently, actually will pull over, and they'll go into a store and they'll buy lunch or they'll browse.
You know, I heard a little girl yesterday saying, "It's so sad that this will all be gone on Sunday." And I said, you know, it's not really going to be gone. What we've done is we've planted seeds. And on Sunday, the seeds are going to get buried under the earth. But they're still in there, and they'll sprout and they'll grow. This gives people the vision of what can be, and that'll help make it happen.
So just out of curiosity, have any communities represented here done what's called tactical urbanism or pop-up like this? Okay, so it looks like there's at least a couple in North Dakota. So hit them up for some more information. I think this is really a wonderful way to help get the message across to a broader community. Now, this project was possible with a small grant from AARP Vermont, and the communities had to go into some competition in order to get it. So why was Bethel chosen? Well, one, it had an energized and engaged community group. There were vacant buildings with willing property owners to try something for a weekend, a good street that could be made better. And what small downtown doesn't have a good street? We've got great bones in our communities. And also a willing and helpful town administration and board. The Bethel Better Block improvements created a livable street, one that you can still drive through, but where you want to stop and linger and talk to your neighbors. There were a lot of different elements introduced on that particular day. One elements such for the streetscape, such as the blue lane, on-street parking, a parklet, bulb outs, pedestrian islands, enhanced crosswalks. But it didn't stop there. They did a lot of programming. So there were pop-up shops to generate some economic activity, such as the taco stand. And in fact, there were 12 temporary businesses that came out to participate in the Bethel Better Block. They also did a lot of programming for people of different ages. So they had a kids space, a beer garden, live music, arts and crafts, really activities for the whole community. Now this is kind of a before and after photos where the before, that right lane is really reserved for just storage of cars. But during the Bethel Better Block, it was for everyone. It was a multi-use lane where people could use an electric tricycle, bike, for kids who are riding stick ponies or others on their little push scooters. And many adults and children said that this is the first time they felt safe biking in their downtown area. Now, there were 2 spaces of on-street parking that were switched over into parklets, where this pop-up vendor set up a taco stand with outdoor tables. And not only did that create an opportunity for some economic activity, but it was also a visual cue to drivers to slow down, to experience the town in a much different way. And then this is an aerial view of the before and after, and you can see before, it's just an expanse of concrete and automobiles. But after, there's a lot of color. There's people out on those streets. It's alive. And the community really was aggressive in that they built a temporary bus stop and got the local transit service to come into town doing some special transportation that day. So just to talk a little bit about the outcomes, the immediate outcomes of the Bethel Better Block. In one weekend, Bethel's downtown came alive with hundreds of visitors, people waiting in line at the taco stand. And in fact, each of those two parking spaces turned into a parklet generated $900 in revenue, and they actually sold out of tacos. And the community was asked what were those features that they most liked, the improvements. And it says, the results say a lot about Vermonters. I think the top two were the beer garden and new restaurants, followed closely by street improvements as well. And then from a traffic safety standpoint, they slowed the speeds from 27 miles per hour down to 15 miles per hour. And while 27 miles per hour may not sound like a really high speed, in fact, about half of pedestrians, if struck by a vehicle moving at that speed, would not be able to survive. So whenever we have an environment where we really want to invite people to come out onto the street to enjoy sidewalks, enjoy that community, it's really essential that we slow traffic down through different means. But slowing traffic down also has a benefit on reducing noise pollution. So they were able to reduce the decibel level down because of reduced traffic speed, as well as the heavy braking and acceleration of trucks coming through their main street, down to a level where it was very welcoming to people to have those conversations out on the sidewalk, want to hang out and enjoy food and a beer at the beer garden. Now, let's look at 3 years later. What are sort of the long-term outcomes of the Better Block project? Well, while Bethel was a weekend event, it catalyzed some permanent changes. So for instance, they've done a lot of beautification. They've built a park benches and installed this beautiful mural on the retaining wall coming into town. They have a traffic calming pilot where they've put seasonal bulb outs in place at 2 of the main crosswalks in the village center. They have a new bus route with permanent bus service between Bethel and a neighboring community. And 2 of the vacant buildings have been purchased by new ownership and rehabbed, offering retail and community space on the ground level and housing on top. So again, something that starts off kind of small actually can have huge reverberating effects across each of these categories of livability. They improve traffic safety. They've created some housing. They've created economic opportunity for downtown businesses. Now, I mentioned that Bethel Better Block was made possible through a state AARP grant, but AARP National also offers grants to help catalyze some of these types of livable communities projects. They're called our Community Challenge Grants. And North Dakota is a state that's done fairly well in receiving and earning grant funds from AARP. There are 7 local communities here in the state that have received funding under this grant program. The one pictured here is Hettinger, and the Chamber of Commerce was able to take some funds and purchase outdoor games that they were using to reactivate a community plaza and build community. Now, in addition to AARP funding for this type of work, and granted our funding levels are quite small, they're not going to change the world in and of themselves by any means, but I think what's really helpful is we have a ton of resources available to you free of charge to help you walk through some of these types of things. So for instance, our last award-winning newsletter advertised an upcoming online session conversation around how to do these pop-up placemaking projects. And that's going to be held on November, I think, 11th and 12th, so you can sign up for that. Now I want to transition to talk a little bit about another area of livability that is very important, and that's transportation. Transportation is the connector that gets us to all of those things we need. such as visiting with family and friends. It gets us to healthcare and other services that really not only help us to survive, but help us to thrive by being able to participate in the social life of one's community. And there's a lot of technology innovation happening in this space right now. So autonomous vehicles get the largest lion's share of the attention, I think, but there's other things such as Uber and Lyft that have really shown us the possibilities for on-demand transportation. But we can also just whip out a smartphone now and look up real-time bus and rail information just with a click of a button. But I think the question that we need to be asking ourselves in the transportation space, in this innovation space, is are those great minds that are bringing us some of these new ways of getting around our communities really thinking about the needs of older adults, people with disabilities, people whose incomes are low, and others who live in rural areas as well, and who may not be benefiting quite as rapidly from these types of innovations. Now, a lot of advocates will say that autonomous vehicles, they're going to solve our immobility problems here in the United States. And I would challenge to say that, yes, I think they can offer more mobility to many individuals, but the fact of the matter is the technology alone does not guarantee that we're going to have more accessible vehicles on our nation's roads. The technology is also, for at least the foreseeable future, going to be very expensive, and so it could actually put more people out of the purchasing power of auto mobility. And when you look at rural areas, there's a reason that these companies have not done a whole lot of testing in rural America, particularly in states like North Dakota, where there's a lot of snowfall. And so are we going to see the benefits of the technology extend to a large segment of our population? I think without some direct interventions and kind of insistence by those of us, this is not going to happen. But one area that I think the technology can very rapidly make a huge improvements in mobility for rural America is by modernizing what we call demand-responsive transportation. Demand-responsive transportation is transportation that doesn't follow a fixed route or schedule like you see in city bus systems. And it's typical that a rural transit system would be demand-responsive, kind of the dial-a-ride, as well as it could also be, say, taxi companies or even Uber and Lyft. Now, if you are one of those 100 million non-drivers in the United States today, if you really have to rely on more specialized transportation services, then a lot of the time you are faced with very inadequate options. So for instance, some of the challenges many older adults and people with disabilities face in the community is they have to make 24 to 48-hour advance reservations. There's inadequate funding and programmatic rules that often limit the number of trips people can take or the type of trips people can take. There's unreliable pickup and drop-off times, jurisdictional boundaries that become arbitrary barriers. You just can't get across the county line even though your health facility is on the other side or your job is on the other side. Lots and lots of fragmentation. I don't know the transportation situation for human services transportation well here in North Dakota, but I was just in Detroit a couple of weeks ago working on a project. And in a 3-county area, they have 100 different community transportation providers, none of which coordinate any of their service. And this leads to extreme levels of inefficiency. So technology can help address some of these challenges. And there are two technologies that are very much on the horizon that are able to happen right now, in fact. And they have to do with what are called data specifications or data standards. It's a way of sharing information about the transportation service as well as about the trip needs among a variety of different providers in order to make the experience much more accessible to the public, a much better experience. So the first of these is what is being currently called the G16 Transactional Data Specification for Demand Responsive Transportation. Now, if anyone in this room can give me a better name to call this, I will do everything I can under the sun to get you one of those community challenge grants, because it is like an extremely wonky term. But essentially what this allows is take those 100 different community transportation providers in Detroit area, they would actually be able to share trip request information, trip scheduling, et cetera, among one another, so that you're not, as a customer, dependent only on the senior center to get you where you need to go. If you request your trip through the senior center, but the public transit provider can provide that trip quicker and more efficiently, then the systems can automatically communicate with one another. That's what that technology does. Now, another one is called the GTFS Flex specification. And what this does, and what actually the state of Vermont has already piloted and has shown that this will work, is it allows rural transit to show up on a trip planner. So Vermont is currently using the Open Trip Planner. Different communities, states use different types. Ultimately, the ideal would be to get this into the Google Maps transit information feature, because that's one of the most widely used. But essentially now, if you're in the state of Vermont and you want to go from Burlington to Bethel, and the only type of public transportation available is on-demand responsive transportation, you will now be alerted that there's service that exists. So it helps the community get the information they need in order to get the transportation that they need. Hugely transformational. So now with that, I had the privilege of being able to go to Denmark last year, this time, to study Denmark's demand responsive transportation system. And it's really one of the world's best, most coordinated, most technologically advanced systems, I would say, in the world. And I want to share with you a video that we brought back from our experience there, and then talk a little bit about how we could bring that here to the United States. So, Sean.
Transportation in Denmark is all about options. Cutting-edge technology connects riders to a myriad of ways to get around. And everyone benefits, no matter what age.
Denmark is a country with 5 million residents. We are an aging population.
Danish law requires transportation services be provided to all citizens who are disabled and to those needing a ride to the hospital.
Because of the elderly population growing, these kinds of services are in high demand.
In the rural areas, where a large percentage of older Danes reside, cost-effective transportation is a necessity. Fixed bus routes on a regular schedule are far too costly to maintain.
What we've seen in many years in Denmark is there would be bus services in many rural areas. Those services are simply, over time, too expensive. Bottom line, there was a lot of air in those buses and too few bumps on the seat.
That was actually one of the starting points. How could you make good mobility services in the countryside without making bus routes? It's not about the line or the route that we're going to take you.
Okay, and now
it's about you as a customer getting the mobility service at the time and at the price and at the quality you need.
One of the reasons to try and see if we could get a more both customer-friendly setup but also a more economical setup was to try and demand responsive service out in those regions, giving the customer a better service, but also the municipals and the regions a better use of their money. So that challenge we've tried to solve with Flex Denmark, which has been a tremendous success.
Flex Denmark is an IT company managed by the public transit authorities. It provides demand-responsive services to Denmark's 5 regions and municipalities. Here, vehicles do not follow a fixed route. Instead, they pick up and drop off riders at the requested address.
Flex Denmark makes sure that the cars are at the right place at the right time and operate in as efficient a manner as possible. Essentially a big algorithm dispatching cars.
These kinds of services are very important in order for elderly people living active lives, being able to take care of themselves for longer parts of their lives. In that sense, elderly people are not different from other people. Flex traffic can also be used by the younger generation. Living in a rural area, kids need to go to football, to the riding school, or come back home late from a friend's house, so it's good for all kinds of people.
Flex Denmark supports competition within the private sector. The platform connects more than 550 private transportation providers into this single integrated system, providing nearly 6 million trips per year.
We do not own any taxis. We tender the whole business. Private operators are doing the operations for us.
The platform accurately calculates these fares and then automatically applies them to various government cost centers for proper payment. Jens Peter Landberg and Niels Erbo have been with Flex Denmark since the beginning.
When I started together with Niels 20 years ago, we had 5 cars. Nobody believed this coordination between a lot of cars, a lot of payers, a lot of customers using the system was possible. Now we have around 1,700 cars in contract.
While Flex Denmark provides the IT to make the system work, Flex Trafik is the brand name for the 5 services offered. These include Flex Patient, Flex Handicap, Flex Municipality, Flex Route, and Flex Tour. These 5 services use the same vehicles to get riders to a variety of destinations. A customer going to a medical appointment may share a ride with someone going to the gym, to school, or to the hairdresser.
Flex Tour, that is special. They pick you up at your address and drive you where you want to go. It's not a taxi. You can meet some people who go to the hospital, and you can meet some people who go to some medical care, but you don't know who you'll travel with.
It's a story about cooperation and also about solving problems.
That's why Denmark recognizes access to transportation as a critical component of healthcare. For example, Flex Patient, funded by the government, connects riders from less populated areas to major hospitals, providing Danish citizens with access to quality care.
It is much cheaper to transport people than it is to give them a bed in the hospital for the night.
We have a lot of customers coming into the hospital. These customers, we take them with small vehicles to the bus and drive them to the central hospital in Copenhagen. There is some medical person on board, and then the small buses bring them right to their home.
AARP has been looking at the Flex Denmark model because we understand that transportation can be a huge challenge for millions here in the United States. The Danes have been especially successful because they agreed 20 years ago that they would use a common data format to share all of the trip data. It basically creates a very integrated system that opens up a lot more possibilities for convenient service. On a per trip cost, it's really no more than what we're spending here. If we apply this technology, we're going to see a great improvement in what we have to offer here in the US.
It's transportation from your own door, and that is very important.
It works every day. It's a lovely way to be transported.
So I understand there's a lot of differences between Denmark and the United States, but just a couple of themes to point out. Denmark offers a very high quality transportation service to everyone in the community. And they not only have that commitment, but they are able to do this at a very economical price because of this technology. And what's special here is that they don't have a service for elderly people, and another service for people with disabilities, and then another service for kids to get to sheltered workshops if they have disabilities. What they've done is they've brought all of the services together, and they have opened it up as service to the general public, particularly in rural areas where there's not fixed route public transportation. And they do this at a cost of, on average, about $30 a trip, which is the same on average cost that we spend here in the United States for demand responsive service. But we have a whole lot less of that, and it's much lesser quality. What else can be said about that? But the creation of a regional system, it's not that they're taking over these different transportation providers. What they're doing is they're providing that hub of the technology and then using that data specification to connect more than 550 different transportation providers, all from the private sector, into that system. And so it's a very seamless, coordinated system. And the way I see it working here in the United States is if you have multiple, both public sector as well as private sector transportation providers, you can attach into their scheduling and dispatch systems in a very similar way using the data specification. And it actually, we've been talking with a technologist who has been experimenting with how can we apply this specification to software that is as inexpensive as Google Sheets and Outlook software in order to do more community coordinated transportation services. So there's a tremendous amount of potential here in this space right now, and we are pushing at different levels to try to see it happen. We're asking people out in the community if they'll try to take the computer code and implement it locally to get demonstrations. We're also talking with folks from high levels, in the federal government to try to get some funding and energy behind this to try new things within, say, Medicaid, non-emergency medical transportation. So in conclusion, I want to just remind us, let's try to disrupt aging. Think about aging as an opportunity, and also think about how we do community planning and design in a wholly different way. We can help, use our communities to really work for us. Community design, it can either enable us or it can disable us. And so, for instance, if we don't have those housing options where we can get down the steps and out into the community, or the transportation options to get us to community events, then we're really missing out on the social and life of the community. And that has a huge impact on health, and it can be very disabling. But we can switch all of that around by thinking differently about how we do community design, by looking at those strategies that tackle not only one area of livability, but all areas of livability across the board, all in one fell swoop. So as Mary Anderson in the Bethel Better Block video said, plant your seeds, water them, and watch your dreams grow. So good luck, and AARP is with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jana, for making the trip to share with us the connection between AARP's Healthy Living philosophy and North Dakota's Main Street Initiative. Thank you, AARP, and specifically our North Dakota team, for your support and advocacy with the Main Street Initiative. We look forward to continuing to partner with you to help every community be healthy, vibrant, and livable. So I've got more new friends. I've got Ellie and Emma, who are also from Rugby, the table that is perhaps unfortunately situated immediately next to me. We're really grateful that you're here. All right, so you might remember yesterday we announced that we had a step challenge by Proximal Fitness, and that the people with the most steps here at the conference would win an award. And so we have to share with you, because she volunteered, or maybe her friend Emma made her do it, reading the names of the high steppers. So come on over here.
Renee Bloms, Ursula Bauer, Callie Thorne, Kay Larson, Char Gus, Beth Devlin, Ashley Ann, and Hazen Chamber.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so you high steppers can go to the registration table after this and claim your prize. So also, I wanted to call attention, Emma actually wanted to call attention to the leave behind on your table. It looks like this. AARP left that on all of your tables, and I didn't want to forget to mention it because there's a lot of great information there. All right, super. So don't leave me yet, ladies. What is coming next? Here's what's coming next. I think it says break and tour on your agenda, but for those of you not going on the tour, break does not mean sit and chill with your smartphone. It means network, go meet people, extend an invitation to your community or accept an invitation to your community. It also means coffee, and you can find that next door, where we're inviting you to head over and learn in the marketplace, where there are more than 70 booths. I checked it out earlier. I told them to expect a tremendous rush of people at about 1:17, so please do not make me a liar. You will enjoy what you see over there. Then from your break, head to the next breakout sessions that start at 1:45. See you over at the marketplace in a few minutes. Thank you. Thank you, ladies.